This past week, I had the opportunity to go on retreat for 5 days. And I went up to the Poconos. It was nice. It was a little chilly, but it was nice. And the leaves were changing. And each day, I tried to take a hike on a trail somewhere. And each day on those hikes, I would try to find either a stream or a lake that I could sit by and just spend some quiet time. Now, I often speak about how important it is to take some quiet time with the Lord each day. But I also know how difficult that can be. Not just taking the time, but actually sitting quietly for that long. It probably took till Thursday before I was able to actually sit quietly and not have my mind racing with all different types of things that are going on in the world, all different types of things going on in my life, in the parish. But once I was able to settle, it made a difference. It makes a difference in our lives when we spend quiet time with God each day. And maybe there's times we don't do it because we're just like, this is crazy. I get distracted. I can't sit here. It's not doing me any good. But it takes time. If today we spent 1 minute in quiet time with the Lord, and even if 1 minute seems a lot, just kind of hang there. And tomorrow, 2 minutes, and maybe next week, 3 minutes. If we slowly get ourselves used to spending quiet time with God, then that's when He can touch our hearts deeply. That's when He can feed us with His grace. And yes, we'll be tempted to talk to God, and there's nothing wrong with talking to God. But spending a few moments or 5 or 10 minutes in quiet with God. Sometimes we can use our imagery. We can pretend we're sitting by a stream, close our eyes, and just pretend that we're sitting somewhere peaceful. Allow God to give us that quiet we need. Because the leaves were changing, they were also falling. And when the leaves fall, they go all over the ground. And if you're on a trail, you can't find the trail because there's leaves everywhere. And everything looks exactly the same. So you really have to pay attention to the little trail markers to make sure you're on the right path. In life, there are a lot of leaves. There are a lot of things that can distract us. A lot of things that can lead us from staying on the right path, from staying on the path that God wants us to be on. But when we spend that time with God each and every day, even if only a few moments, when we spend that quiet time with God, then we're able to stay on the path. And when we find ourselves veering off the path in one direction or another, God is there to kind of bring us back. There's times we're not exactly sure where we're supposed to go. And again, that quiet time with God, when we allow Him to fill us with His grace, then interiorly, He guides us to where we're supposed to go. I had an app with me that kind of showed you where the trail was and also showed you where you were walking. And it's pretty cool. So if you walked off the trail, it kind of told you you were walking off the trail, and then you could find your way back. So one day I decided I was on a trail. It looked like a trail, but it wasn't on any map that I had. And I thought, well, I'll just go up this trail. So I got about a mile up the trail. And I don't know how to say it in church, but I came across some bear stuff. And I think it's called scat. And it was pretty fresh. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't think I'm going to walk any farther. So I kind of quietly just turned around, and I moved a lot quicker going down the hill than I did going up the hill. Sometimes in life, we find ourselves somewhere, and we're like, whoa, shouldn't be here. This isn't good. This isn't a place I should be. And how are we able to turn around? By staying in touch with God. When God dwells within us in a special way, when we invite Him in a special way, then when we get somewhere or find ourselves in a situation that's difficult or is not good for us, we most likely can each think of some time. Maybe it's with a family member. Maybe it's when we're on the computer. could be times when we just get ourselves somewhere, we're just like, this isn't good. This isn't a place that's a good path for me to be on. And God is there to give us the grace and the strength to go in the right direction. First reading said, "The Lord is a God of justice who knows no favorites." We all know there's times we think God has favorites, and we're not one of them. But when we have that constant contact with God, then we're able to remember that each and every one of us are his favorite, that he does care about each and every one of us equally. The reading went on to say, "The Lord is not deaf. The one who serves God willingly is heard." Perhaps there's times we think God needs a new set of hearing aids. He's not hearing me. He seems to be hearing everybody else, but he's not hearing me. Today we ask God for the faith and the grace to believe he is hearing us, that he's not deaf. And where things don't seem to be happening exactly as we would like them to happen, to have that grace to just say, okay, God, I'm going to trust you're here. I'm going to trust you're paying attention. The psalm said, "The Lord hears the cry of the poor." Each and every one of us are poor. Some are poor materially, some are poor spiritually. You know, this is Mission Sunday, where we remember the poor throughout the world and in our country. We ask God to give them the grace and the substances that they need. But each and every one of us are poor. And the greatest possession we can have is God himself. If we strive to possess God more than anything else, how different each day, each week, each month, each year would be. St. Paul said, "I am already being poured out like a libation." You know, being poured out. Maybe we feel that our glass is almost empty, that we're being poured out and there's not much left. God says, let me fill your glass. Each day, let me put my grace in your glass, so as you're pouring that glass out each day, you know it's going to be filled the next day. I have competed well. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Wouldn't that be wonderful at the end of our lives to be able to say that? I've competed well. I've kept the faith. I've finished the race. We don't have to win the race. But when God is right there with us as we run the race each day, amazing. The Lord stood by me and gave me strength. May we remember that. That the Lord stands by us each and every day and gives us his strength. And then the familiar gospel. The Pharisee and the tax collector. And what's the Pharisee say? "Oh God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity." Aren't I wonderful? I'm so glad I'm not like everybody else. And then what does the tax collector say? "Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner." And each and every one of us can say that to God, not so we can beat ourselves up. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Guide me. Be a part of everything I do. What's going to be different today if we just did that? Today we said, God, be merciful to me. How are we going to live our lives differently? What would we say differently? What would we do differently? It's amazing. But sometimes we prefer to go down the wrong path. And when we go down the wrong path, we forget that we can turn around when something's not going right. We can turn back to God. The last line of the gospel. "Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted." We humble ourselves when we come before the Lord each day and ask for his grace and his strength. On retreat, it was wonderful to be able to sit by the water and just sit quietly, and sometimes it was harder than others because there's stuff on the mind. But each time we try to do that, it gets easier and easier. And that's how God can fill us with his grace and his strength. That's how we can stay on the path. That's how we can stay on the path when we find ourselves veering one way or the other. May we take the chance today May we take the chance each day to communicate with God, beginning today. Communicate with God. Let him fill us with his grace. And just see how different life can be.